What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS core plays for this week's ZOZO Championship. We head over to Japan, so lock going to be early tomorrow evening, I believe right around 8 p.m. Eastern time, so make sure you don't go ahead and miss that. But in this video, going to cover 4 of my top plays for GPP contests this weekend towards the top of the board. Now, because ownership is out, we have a better idea of who's going to be chalk and who some of the lower owned pivots might end up being. And in this video, focusing on 4 of the relatively low-owned plays up top that I think can not only go out there and get you a top-end ceiling performance, but also some much-needed ownership leverage to the field. So a lot to talk about. Let's go ahead and get this thing rocking. All right, we've got my projections up, and just to get this thing started, let's go over to the key stats tab and make sure we're all on the same page. So Narashino Country Club out there in Japan, 2 greens on every single hole. For the most part, you have a zoysia base. That's going to be the fairways and the rough. It's said to be a little bit more gnarly this week than what we've seen in the past. Xander Schauffele was quoted as saying that if the wind kicks up, this course is going to play extremely difficult compared to past years. And as a result, I'm more looking at precision into greens and, of course, your precision off the tee more than anything else. So when we look at approach play, it's always going to be the king of any sort of stat analysis. I'm looking at that 100 to 125 yard range, also the 175 to 200 yard range, which might seem a little bit counterintuitive, as one of them is a wedge range, and then the 175 to 200 is part of that mid to long iron range. But at this golf course, if you saw my course breakdown, almost every hole is either 400 yards or less, or close to 500 yards, some of them even above 500 yard par 4s. So you're looking at a spread out profile when it comes to your approach distances. So it isn't quite a golf course where we can classify it as a wedge fest or a long iron fest. It's really a mix of the both extremes. So that's what you're looking at there. Off the tee, accuracy and distance both going to be important. And though it's only listed at just under 7,100 yards, it does play a lot longer because it's generally extremely wet this time of year, and also because it's a par 70 with 5 par 3s. So some of that distance is a little bit deceptive there, as 5 of the holes are only right around 140, 150 yards total. In terms of the other key stats, it's a bent grass course, so we're looking at bent grass putting. Around the green should be important, particularly if it plays difficult, like Xander Schauffele was talking about. Looking at some comp courses, par 3 scoring, no cut events, shots gained, and par 5 scoring too. But focusing on our plays now, so hopping over to the key stats tab, 4 plays that we're going to go through. And the first one we'll touch on is Colin Murraya at $10,200. And this is a perfect course for him, right? Where off the tee precision is the name of the game. Also, that approach play specifically from that 100 to 125 yard range or the long iron range, that's where Colin Murraya makes his hay. It's those mid irons where he's still well above average, but he's not quite elite like he is with those long irons or those wedges. So if we get him at a golf course that exacerbates that kind of skill set, first off, gotta love that, particularly if he's coming in low owned. Now, 17.5%, that's what I got him at in terms of his projected ownership. Might not seem super low, but when you compare it to Hideki, who's a solid 5 to 6% higher, somebody like Xander, who's nearly 30% owned, or even Sanjay M, who deservingly is getting a ton of attention at this point, are all a solid 7 to 10% higher owned. Then Colin Murraya, who, though he hasn't been extremely flashy of late, you can see he's just number 10 in my Narashino Country Club fit, he's still coming in with some sneaky good form. So if we head over to the shots gained metrics, get an idea of what I'm talking about, he's gaining off the tee, slightly gaining with the putter, but getting back to that approach play that we know him for. And when Colin Murraya is striping the irons, he has win equity at any golf course. I'm talking PGA Championship, super long setup, like what you have at Kiowa Island. He obviously won the year before that at TPC Harding Park. Or at a short golf course, like what we had for Congaree, or down there at Congressional there a few years ago. The Concession, sorry, it's the course that I was thinking about there for that WGC. He can take on any variety of golf course. And what you really have to like about Murraya is that when you get him at a smaller field, I don't want to call this a weak field, right? It's not a major championship by any means. That win equity just goes through the roof, right? It goes from well above average to elite level stuff. In fact, I've already bet Colin Murraya outright here. So you have to like the fact that the irons are giving us exactly what we're looking for. Off the tee brings the accuracy to the table. And the recent form, though it hasn't been elite, has been a lot better than people want to give him credit for. Had one of his best iron performances all year at the Tour Championship, finished in the top 5 at the FedEx St. Jude. At the President's Cup was respectable, hit plenty of solid iron shots. The record was above average, right? Wasn't out there leaking strokes for the American team. Just in general, I think he's going in the right direction at this point. He's going to be one of the low-owned options up top that you can get to. And anytime Colin Murraya tees it up, he's got a legit chance of going out there and winning if he can figure out the putter and what better time to get to him when he's low-owned up top. He's in a field that's a little bit condensed, which just further boosts his win equity. And that's seemingly a great course fit. So a lot of reasons to get to him there, and I'll be there in bunches for sure. Next up, we've got Viktor Hovland, and he's the most contentious player that I talk about here on the channel. I'm usually either really for Viktor Hovland or extremely against playing him, and a lot of that comes down to his skill set. You know, he's got this elite level ball striking skill set. He's also an elite level putter, which seemingly would make him a fit at any golf course. It's just the around the green play is so poor that depending on whether it's going to be an around the green week, that's really the one decision point that we have with him. And at this golf course, if you're missing the greens, if you're missing fairways here, getting out of trouble, then you're probably going to be missing. There's no cut here, right? So there's no such thing as missing the cut, but you're going to be behind the 8 ball. You're going to be well outside of the optimal lineup if you're hoping somebody's getting up and down more than not. So Viktor Hovland at $9,500, I have to love getting there. And if the rough's going to be even more penal than we've seen in years past, then somebody like Hovland that has an elite skill set both in terms of his distance and his accuracy off the tee is going to be on even more of an advantage. So I like getting there. The irons for Hovland have been there too, so you can see gaining close to half a stroke per round, gaining close to a third of a stroke per round off the tee, so both of those are positive metrics. And gaining across the board, he's even figured out how to gain around the green, so that's probably the most surprising stat that I've seen to this point of the week. But gaining across the board, you love to see it. And though the form hasn't been flashy, kind of like a Colin Murraya, it's been decent, right? He was solid with the ball striking at the Tour Championship, finished in 15th, top 20 at the FedEx St. Jude. And if you look at some of his DP World Tour finishes, and specifically from a round-by-round sample, he's had some of those spike performances where he's gone up there, finished in the top 5, top 10. So if you look at his PGA Tour stuff, right, it looks pretty average. It looks like your typical Viktor Hovland. But when we expand our search a little bit, start to look at some of the DP World Tour stuff, is when you start to get excited about playing Viktor Hovland. So hopefully the casuals this week won't catch on to it. You can see he's a gainer on bent grass too, which is an added plus there for Viktor Hovland, and only 15.9% owned. Now, this is early in the week. I would expect Hovland to get steamed up a little bit as people catch on to how he's played internationally and in general start to react to some of the ownership. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't touch on when it comes to their GPP strategy, is we get ownership numbers usually on a Tuesday around the industry. That's usually when I put together my numbers too, after I've had a chance to digest some of the content from other creators. And people react to that first set, right? We put out our first set of ownership projections, and then you have people out there that are going to start to fade the chalk. They're going to start to go to some of the pivots, and what you usually see is a little bit of a evening out of the board, right? Ownership tends to get a little bit flatter as you go from like a Tuesday to a Wednesday. So maybe he comes in closer to like 17, 18% by the end of the week. Maybe Murraya gets a little bit closer to 20% by the time that we get to the Wednesday lock there tomorrow evening. But in either circumstance, they're going to be some of the lowest owned options on the entire slate and people that I'm getting to in bunches. For our last two picks, first we're going to touch on Corey Conners here. And at $9,000, he has a very similar skill set to a Viktor Hovland, except with a little bit less putting upside. Except when we take a look at the last 24 rounds, you can see that Corey Conners is pretty decent with the putting, right? Gaining off the tee like you'd expect, 2/3 of a stroke per round, gaining close to half a stroke per round with the approach play. Now, the around the green and the putting is never going to be a massive plus for Corey Conners, but over the last year or so, and you can see that's still the case over the last 24 rounds, the putter has started to come along, right? He's not going to be a consistent, massive gainer, right? Like a Denny McCarthy or one of those elite level putters. But if he goes out there and he's even respectable in that category, he can more than carry himself with those ball striking categories. So when we zoom out a little bit, take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, you can see it actually flips to a positive. The ball striking categories remain. And though the recent form is sketchy, now this is the one pick here where the recent form actually, our last pick also has a little bit of sketchy recent form, but I'm willing to look past it. You know, he missed the cut at the Fortinet Championship, Tour Championship, finished third from last. Before that, it was just a 28th and a 21st place finish at the FedEx St. Jude and Wyndham Championship. So he's far from in form, but he's also still making cuts. He's still keeping himself in the conversation. At the Fortnite, he did miss the cut, but if you look at his record from last year, he typically rebounds relatively quickly from missed cuts, and in general was one of the most consistent players that we had on tour. So, if he was coming in with any sort of form, I mean, the stats are still behind him, right? He's still a top 5 fit across the board, still loves bent grass for the last 3 years on tour. He's only 12% owned. If he was coming in with a couple flashy finishes like we saw 2-3 weeks starts ago for a Corey Connors, that's when he was nearly 25% owned in a similar sort of field, right? So we're getting the ownership discount, we're getting the price discount at this point, and essentially it's the same course fit that we were getting just a month and a half ago at this point. Just a much better play now. Somebody that I was fading in that circumstance didn't really end up paying off, but now that he's low owned, somebody that I'm running to the window to play. So absolutely love Corey Connors there, and he's the start of my 9K range / top of the 8K range that I see myself getting to. And the last pick we'll touch on, and I'll remind you, if you're looking for all of my picks up top, I'm clearly playing more than 4 players above 8 grand. They're on my Patreon page. I post all of my modeling, so all of the numbers that you're seeing here are available for every single player in the field, all 78, and they'll change throughout the week, right? If I'm adjusting for slightly harder conditions that might end up being the case, now that we've had that quote from Xander Schauffele there, things are going to change, right? Might be a little bit more emphasis on around the green now. Driving accuracy might end up being a little bit more important this time around than it was before. Just if you want access to all of that, it's on the Patreon, and I'd highly recommend it. It's a great community, a lot of useful information there for y'all. But the last pick we're going to touch on is Davis Riley at $8,000, and I'm a little bit of a sucker for Davis Riley, I do have to admit, but at this point, it's just way too good to pass up. First off, he's super cheap, 8 grand. The cheapest we've seen him for God knows how long at this point. The shots gained metrics are still okay, right? He's number 16 in total model ranking, down there at number, I believe, 21 in price. So he's still a slight value, but not quite the value that he was, just a couple months ago when the ball striking was off the roof. Decent putter on bent grass, but only 8.8% owned. So at this point, people are giving up on Davis Riley. The price has come down, and I'd argue that the shots gained metrics really aren't all that bad. So when we bring him up down here, you'll see that he's gaining off the tee. The approach play has come back down to earth, losing with the putter like he tends to do from time to time. But let's zoom out a little bit, right? Let's give him a larger sample size, try and give him a little bit of a break. Oh, that's right. Back to gaining across the board, right? Gaining a third of a stroke per round off the tee, over half a stroke per round on approach. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves who we're dealing with. And with Davis Riley, he's an elite level player who has been in a little bit of a slump over the last month or so. And now that we're getting him low owned, low priced, and somebody that's extremely easy to get leverage to, I'm going to take that shot 10 out of 10 times. I mean, he's more than viable to miss the cut here, but we're talking about in a large field GPP 150 max sort of scenario, right? That's where I get my exposure when it comes to golf DFS. I'd be crazy not to play him. I mean, this is a golf course where, sure, accuracy off the tee matters, but it's more about the approach play than anything, and he checks that box emphatically. I mean, off the tee, right? He's pretty comparable to a Hideki, where he's not the most accurate off the tee, but he can get into streaks where he's able to put together, 9 or 10 fairways in a round. Kind of like Hideki, who in general is a relatively inaccurate driver, but when he's clicking off the tee, he gains in bunches. I mean, look at the last 50 measured rounds, right? Gaining close to a third of a stroke per round in that category. That's elite level stuff, right? You can't gain like that unless you're hitting fairways every once in a while. So I do think he has it in him. It's within his range of outcomes for him to go out there and even win this event, let alone finish something there in the top 5 to top 10 of 78 player field. And really, you're buying him at his low point now. He's a lot lower price than what we've seen over the last few months, the lowest ownership number you're going to get. And again, I'm a sucker for Davis Riley, so it shouldn't be a surprise that I'm getting to him in bunches this week. All right, fellas, that is all I've got for this week's core picks. Before you hopping out of here, go ahead and smash that like button, but also go ahead and comment down below who you've got winning. I'm going to take 2 players, a little bit of a cheat here. Going to go with Kaba and Hovland. Love both of their win equity. In fact, they're the only 2 players I've bet at this point, so it would be hard for me not to take them. But go ahead and let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Until next time, best of luck with all of your lineups. We will have a value picks video dropping on later on this evening. Also, fades and sleepers dropping. And again, like I mentioned off the bat, do not forget about Lock. It's at right around 8 p.m. tomorrow night Eastern time. We will have a live stream going on as per usual, but likely going to be a little bit earlier. I'm thinking something like 6 p.m. Eastern, maybe 6:30 p.m. Eastern. So it's going to be a true live before Lock. You're going to have the most updated ownership, the most updated player pool humanly imaginable for that sort of stream. And if you have any of those last second questions, it'll be the perfect time to address them. So until then, guys, best of luck with everything that you're doing, right from the outright betting and the DFS perspective. And I'll catch you guys on the flip side.